The pregnancy test trembled in Maddie's hands as she stared at the two pink lines that would change everything. Jake sat beside her on the bathroom floor of her family's modest home, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders as reality crashed over them both. They were 17, seniors at Riverside High, with college acceptance letters already arriving in their mailboxes. Now those dreams felt as fragile as autumn leaves in a hurricane. "We're going to be okay," Jake whispered, though his voice cracked with uncertainty. He pressed his forehead against Maddie's temple, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "We'll figure this out together." Maddie's parents, Robert and Lisa Chen, took the news with a mixture of disappointment and resignation. Lisa cried quietly while Robert paced their small kitchen, his calloused hands from years of construction work clenched into fists. They weren't happy, but they didn't abandon their daughter. "You've made your choice," Robert finally said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Now you both have to live with the consequences. But you're still our daughter, Maddie. We'll help however we can." Jake's parents, however, were a different story entirely. David Morrison had built his reputation as a respected insurance broker on the foundation of family values and community respect. His wife, Patricia, served on the school board and organized charity events at their Methodist church. They lived in the affluent Maple Heights neighborhood, where Jake had grown up playing baseball on manicured lawns and attending piano lessons every Tuesday after school. When Jake sat them down in their pristine living room that evening, the silence that followed his announcement was deafening. Patricia's face went white, then red, as if she'd been slapped. David stood slowly from his leather recliner, his expensive suit still crisp despite the long day at the office. "Pregnant?" Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. "That girl is pregnant, and you're telling us it's yours?" "Her name is Maddie, Mom, and yes, I'm the father." Jake tried to keep his voice steady, but his hands were shaking. "We know this isn't what you wanted for me, but what we wanted—" David's voice exploded through the room. "What we wanted was for you to graduate, go to state university, make something of yourself, not throw your entire future away for some teenage mistake." "She's not a mistake," Jake shot back, standing to face his father. "I love her and we're going to make this work." Patricia began sobbing, dramatic heaves that shook her whole body. "How could you do this to us, Jake? How could you be so irresponsible? Do you know what people will say? What they'll think of our family?" "I don't care what people think," Jake said firmly. "I care about Maddie and our baby." David's face turned purple with rage. "Our baby? You're 17 years old. You don't know anything about responsibility, about providing for a family. You can barely keep your room clean, and you think you're ready to be a father?" The argument escalated quickly, voices rising until the neighbors could probably hear every word. Patricia accused Jake of ruining their family's reputation. David called him selfish and stupid. Jake defended his choices and his girlfriend, his voice growing hoarse from shouting. Finally, David delivered the ultimatum that would change everything. "You have two choices, son. You can end this nonsense, convince that girl to give the baby up for adoption and get your life back on track, or you can pack your bags and get out of my house. I will not support this foolishness, and I will not have you dragging our family name through the mud." Jake stared at his parents in disbelief. These were the people who had taught him about integrity, about standing by your commitments. Now, they wanted him to abandon the girl he loved and their grandchild. "Fine," Jake said quietly, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "If that's how you really feel, then I'll leave." "Don't be dramatic," Patricia sniffed. "Just think about what we're saying. You could still have a future." "I am thinking about my future," Jake interrupted, "and it includes Maddie and our baby. I thought it might include you, too, but apparently I was wrong." He walked upstairs to his childhood bedroom, walls still, decorated with baseball trophies and honor roll certificates, and began stuffing clothes into his old camping backpack. Patricia followed, pleading with him to reconsider, but Jake's resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. When he reached the front door with his meager possessions, David stood blocking his path one final time. "If you walk out that door, don't come crawling back when reality hits," his father said coldly. "You've made your choice. Live with it." Jake looked one last time at the house where he'd grown up, at the parents who had raised him to believe in doing the right thing, until doing the right thing became inconvenient for them. Then he stepped into the cold October night, homeless, but not hopeless, carrying nothing but his determination to prove them wrong. Jake's alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., the same time it had for the past 6 months since he'd made the hardest decision of his young life. He rolled off the air mattress in Alex Rodriguez's garage, his back aching from another night on the thin, padding. His best friend's family had taken him in when he had nowhere else to go, but Jake knew he couldn't impose on their kindness forever. 3 weeks after being kicked out, Jake had made another life-altering choice. He dropped out of high school. While his former classmates sat in calculus and English literature, Jake was learning a different kind of education under the hood of cars at Martinez Auto Repair. Tommy Martinez, the shop's weathered owner, had taken pity on the desperate teenager, who showed up begging for any kind of work. "I can't pay much," Tommy had warned, his hands permanently stained with motor oil. "But if you're willing to learn and work hard, I'll teach you everything I know." Jake threw himself into the work. With desperate intensity, he absorbed everything Tommy taught him about engines, transmissions, and electrical systems. His hands, once soft from his privileged upbringing, became calloused and permanently dirty. But with each skill he mastered, his confidence grew. "You've got natural talent, kid," Tommy said one afternoon as Jake successfully diagnosed a tricky engine problem. "Most guys take years to develop the instincts you're showing." Meanwhile, Maddie was fighting her own battles. Her pregnancy had become obvious by December, and the whispers at school followed her down every hallway. Former friends avoided her, and teachers looked at her with mixture of pity and disappointment. But Maddie held her head high, determined to graduate despite the challenges. Her morning sickness was brutal during the first trimester. Jake would arrive at the Chen house at dawn before work, holding Maddie's hair back as she retched, then walking her to school before racing to the garage. Their stolen moments together were precious. Quick kisses between classes, texts sent during lunch breaks, and evenings spent planning for their uncertain future. By February, Jake had saved enough money to rent a tiny studio apartment above Mrs. Peterson's bakery. The space was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette, a fold-out couch, and a bathroom the size of a closet. But it was theirs. "It's perfect," Maddie said the first time she saw it, her hand resting on her growing belly. She was 7 months pregnant now, moving carefully as Jake helped her up the narrow stairs. They furnished the apartment with donations and thrift store finds. Alex's mother contributed a crib his younger sister had outgrown. The Chen family provided dishes and linens. Slowly, the empty space became a home. Jake worked 60-hour weeks, coming home exhausted but driven by purpose. He'd found a part-time evening job stocking shelves at the local grocery store, squeezing every possible dollar from his limited opportunities. Maddie took on babysitting jobs when her energy allowed, saving every penny for the baby's arrival. The birth came 2 weeks early on a sweltering July night. Maddie's water broke while they were watching a movie on their small television, and Jake's hands shook as he drove her to the hospital in his rusty Honda Civic, the first car he'd bought and repaired himself. 18 hours of labor tested both their limits. Jake held Maddie's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and promises. "You're so strong," he told her during the worst moments. "We're almost there. Our little girl is almost here." Emma Rose Morrison entered the world at 6:23 a.m., weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces. When the doctor placed her in Jake's arms, the 18-year-old father felt his entire world shift on its axis. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, and Jake knew with absolute certainty that every sacrifice had been worth this moment. "She's beautiful," Maddie whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "Look what we made, Jake." The first weeks of parenthood were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and learning to interpret Emma's different cries. Their tiny apartment felt even smaller with a baby, but somehow it also felt more complete. Jake would arrive home, from work to find Maddie singing lullabies to Emma, and his heart would swell with pride and love. Money was tight, tighter than Jake had ever imagined possible. They lived on generic cereal, ramen noodles, and whatever vegetables Maddie's mother brought over. Jake's work clothes were permanently stained, and Maddie's wardrobe consisted of second-hand nursing tops and jeans held together with safety pins. But in the quiet moments, when Emma slept peacefully between them on their lumpy mattress, when Maddie would look up from nursing their daughter with eyes full of love, when Jake realized he'd successfully provided for his family for another day, he felt richer than he ever had in his parents' mansion. Tommy began teaching Jake more advanced skills, recognizing his dedication and natural ability. "You're not just a parts replacer," Tommy told him one afternoon as Jake completed a complex transmission repair. "You understand how everything works. Together. That's rare." By Emma's first birthday, Jake had been promoted to Tommy's second-in-command at the shop. He was earning more money, and they'd moved to a slightly larger apartment with an actual bedroom for Emma. Maddie had enrolled in night classes to finish her high school diploma, dreaming of eventually becoming a nurse. Their relationship had deepened through the trials they'd faced together. They'd learned to communicate through exhaustion, to support each other through moments of doubt, and to find joy in the smallest victories. When Emma took her first steps, they celebrated by sharing a pint of ice cream they'd been saving for weeks. Some nights, Jake would lie awake thinking about his parents, wondering if they ever thought about their granddaughter. He'd drive past their house occasionally, seeing his father mowing the perfect lawn or his mother tending her prized rose garden. They looked the same, but Jake felt like a different person entirely. The boy who had left that house nearly 2 years ago had been dependent, uncertain, and untested. The man who watched his daughter sleep while planning tomorrow's work schedule had been forged by necessity into someone stronger than he'd ever imagined possible. As Emma babbled happily in her high chair, covering herself with mashed bananas, Jake caught Maddie watching him with a soft smile. "What?" he asked, reaching over to wipe Emma's face. "I was just thinking," Maddie said, "about how different our lives turned out from what we planned. But I wouldn't change any of it." Jake looked around their modest apartment, at the second-hand furniture, the toys scattered on the worn carpet, the pile of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, and felt the truth of her words in his bones. They'd built something real from nothing, something that belonged entirely to them. 5 years had transformed Jake Morrison from a desperate teenager into a man who commanded respect in his community. Morrison Auto Repair occupied a corner lot on Elm Street, its modest sign bearing Jake's name in bold blue letters. What had started as a dream during those long nights in Tommy's garage had become reality when Tommy decided to retire and sold Jake the business at a price he could actually afford. "You built this place into something special," Tommy had said on his last day, keys jingling as he handed them over. "I'm proud of what you've become, son." The shop employed 4 mechanics now, and Jake's reputation for honest work and fair prices had earned him customers from 3 counties over. His hands, permanently stained despite scrubbing, moved with the confidence of a master craftsman as he diagnosed problems that stumped other mechanics. Maddie had achieved her own dreams, graduating from the community college's nursing program with honors while working nights at the hospital as a medical assistant. The little girl who'd been whispered about in high school hallways was now entrusted with people's health and well-being. Her scrubs bore the name Madison Morrison. They'd married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse when Emma turned 3, with Alex as best man and Maddie's sister as maid of honor. Emma, now 5 and starting kindergarten, was a perfect blend of both parents. She had Jake's mechanical curiosity and Maddie's gentle persistence, spending afternoons at the shop asking endless questions about how engines worked while coloring pictures at the front desk. Her laugh could brighten Jake's darkest days, and her innocent observations often provided wisdom that surprised him. "Daddy," she'd said just last week, "why don't Grandpa David and Grandma Patricia ever come to my birthday parties?" The question hit Jake like a wrench to the chest. In 5 years, his parents had never once reached out. Not when Emma was born, not when he got married, not when local newspapers featured his successful business. Their silence had become a dull ache he'd learned to carry. But that changed. On a Tuesday morning in September, when Patricia Morrison walked through the shop's front door. Jake was under the hood of a Chevy Suburban when Maddie called from the office, her voice carefully neutral. "Jake, there's someone here to see you." He emerged from under the hood, wiping his hands on a shop rag, and froze. His mother stood near the counter, looking older and smaller than he remembered. Her perfectly styled hair showed gray roots, and uncertainty had replaced the confident authority he'd known growing up. "Hello, Jake," Patricia said softly. Emma looked up from her coloring book, studying this stranger with curious eyes. "Are you here to get your car fixed?" Patricia's breath caught as she took in her granddaughter, the child she'd never met, but whose existence had haunted her conscience. "No, sweetheart. I'm your daddy's mommy." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Jake's employees pretended to focus on their work while clearly listening to every word. Maddie appeared in the office doorway, ready to support whatever decision Jake made. "What do you want, Mom?" Jake's voice carried the weight of 5 years, of hurt and disappointment. Patricia's composure cracked. "I want to apologize. I want to meet my granddaughter. She struggled for words. "I want to undo the biggest mistake I ever made." She explained through tears how she and David had watched from a distance, seeing Jake's success in the local newspaper business features, hearing about his reputation from their own mechanic who'd started sending difficult jobs to Morrison Auto Repair. They'd driven past his shop countless times, pride and shame warring in their hearts. "Your father is too stubborn to admit he was wrong," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "But I can't live with this anymore. I've missed 5 years of my granddaughter's life because I was more worried about what other people would think than what was right." Emma approached cautiously, her small hand slipping into Jake's larger one. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "Sometimes people make mistakes, but they can say sorry." The wisdom of a 5-year-old cut through years of resentment. Jake looked at his mother, really looked at her, and saw not the woman who had rejected him, but a grandmother who had missed bedtime stories, first steps, and birthday candles. "It's going to take time," Jake said finally. "You can't just walk back in and pretend nothing happened." "I know," Patricia nodded eagerly. "I know I have to earn the right to be part of your lives. But please, Jake, please give me that chance." The reconciliation was gradual and sometimes painful. Patricia began visiting the shop regularly, bringing Emma small gifts and listening to stories about school and friends. She marveled at the business Jake had built, the family he'd created, the man he'd become without any help from his parents. David proved more stubborn, as Patricia had predicted. He attended Emma's 6th birthday party as a silent observer, uncomfortable but present. It would take months more before he could admit out loud that his son had become everything he'd claimed to value: hard-working, responsible, devoted to family. The real turning point came when the community center asked Jake to speak at their youth mentorship program. Standing before an audience of teenage parents and at-risk youth, Jake found himself telling his story with a clarity that surprised even him. 5 years ago, I was homeless, scared, and completely unprepared for fatherhood, he said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. Everyone told me I was throwing my life away, but sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. He spoke about the nights he'd worked until his hands bled, about the fear that kept him awake, wondering if he could provide for his family, about the moment he'd realized he was becoming the man he'd always wanted to be. The easy path isn't always the right path, Jake continued. And the right path is never easy. But when you're fighting for something bigger than yourself, when you're fighting for the people you love, you discover strength you never knew you had. In the audience, Maddie wiped away tears as she watched her husband inspire others with their story. Patricia sat beside her, finally understanding that her son's supposed disgrace had actually been his making. After the speech, a young father approached Jake with a baby in his arms and desperation in his eyes. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Everyone says I should give up. Find an easier way." Jake placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, remembering his own terror and uncertainty. "You don't have to know how to do everything," he said. "You just have to know why you're doing it. The how comes with practice." Driving home that night with his family, Emma chattering about the cookies at the community center, Maddie's hand warm in his, Jake reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them here. The boy who'd been kicked out for disgracing his family had built a life that was a source of genuine pride. His parents' rejection had forced him to discover who he really was beneath their expectations and limitations. The hardship had revealed reserves of strength and determination he might never have accessed from the comfort of his childhood bedroom. Emma fell asleep in the back seat, her head pillowed against her stuffed elephant. In the rearview mirror, Jake could see her peaceful face in the glow of the streetlights. She would grow up knowing that love wasn't conditional, that family meant standing by each other no matter what, that real success was measured not in social approval, but in the lives you touched and the people you lifted up. As they pulled into the driveway of their modest but comfortable home, Jake realized that being kicked out had been the push he needed to become the man, husband, and father he was meant to be. Sometimes the greatest gift comes disguised as the worst rejection, and sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. The lights were on in their living room, casting a warm glow that spoke of dinners shared, homework helped, and bedtime stories told. It wasn't the life anyone had planned, but it was the life they'd built together. Honest, hard-won, and absolutely their own.